Hello, and welcome everybody to today's Criterion Learning Series. My name is Steve Tompkins, and I'm going to be covering forms today. Obviously, forms are something we've had in the system for a while, but we've not had a Criterion Learning Series on it, so good time to talk about that. I do want to remind everybody that we do have a Q&A as well as a chat feature that you can use if you have any questions or would like to chat. We do have Patrick in here monitoring, so he'll be able to answer your questions. And if there is something that we can't get to or we can't answer during today's call, we will definitely follow up with you to make sure we get those answered. So let's go ahead and switch into the system here so we can get started. All right, so you should be able to see my browser here in self-service. We will be using part of self-service today to do forms, but as usual, I do want to go through the setup of a form first so you can see how that works, and then we'll actually use a form and we'll talk about how that works from the user perspective. So of course, we're going to need to go to our settings to configure forms and to set up a form. So I already have that open here in a separate tab. Now, one thing to note is that you probably want to have a workflow on your forms. So that's going to be done in system configuration. And you'll see I have a few different form workflows out here. Obviously, you can have as many as you like. And just to show you what one might look like here, what the name is, of course, a workflow type would be form. The module is always going to be self-service because that's where forms are actually used. And settings like the auto actions and if it requires a signature and so forth like that, you can do that. In my situation here, you'll notice that I've got the initiator being the person who's filling out the form, and then an approval being a named person here of Chris. Now, one important thing on here is you can have a performer here as the assigned employee. So a use case for this would be if you have a form that perhaps a manager fills out for an employee, and then the employee signs the form. So that's where this would be used for a situation like that, where it maybe goes manager, employee, and then it goes to one or more verifiers or approvers. So this is a unique thing for forms, is you can choose the assigned employee. All right, so you can kind of see how that can be assigned there. And when I do that, of course, the verification happens before the approval. That's the way that this works. And you'll see that right there. Of course, if I had made it the approver, I could make the assigned employee the approver, but I already have Chris as the approver. All right, so I'm not going to bother touching those right now, but get an idea of what the workflow looks like in there. So forms are right here in the system. And I do want to talk about a couple of things here. One, you'll see a few forms here that are marked as system forms. So these are used specifically for the ones you see noted here, the 1099, EEO1 component 2, T4/ROE, and W2 settings. So you can't edit these. You can't really tell. I'm trying to click on them. It won't let me edit them. What you would do is if you do need to create one of these that are, typically payroll, this one's not, this is HR, but let's say I needed to get some settings for my W2 as an example, or T4, I can assign this form to an administrator who's going to fill out the information there, and it allows you to save information that would print out on your W2s or your T4s or whatever that is right there. So that's what these system forms are for. Like I said, you can't edit them. Sometimes we need to make changes. We being Criterion need to make changes and add new settings or different configurations on there. And we'll take care of that, obviously, but that's what these are. So there's no confusion. You can copy them, but it doesn't really do you any good to copy them because you still can't do anything with this system forms. So yeah, that's what those are. Now, the rest of the forms are ones that pretty much you would be adding. Now, there are some in here, for an example, the I-9 form and the W-4 that we also will maintain. But pretty much every other form is going to be one that you maintain and one that you would add or edit in the system here. So there's a couple of options on how you can do this. on adding and editing a form. So you'll see here a button for adding and importing. Now under add, we do have an option for what we call a data form. Now a data form is basically a form that you don't really have a choice in the layout. So traditionally a form, think of it as like, maybe something you sign, you have some verbiage up top and you maybe collect some data, but you can choose exactly where everything goes on the form. When you do a data form, you put on the fields, but there's no formatting. So you might collect some information, some dates, some text, some drop downs or whatever, but the order they are here, the sequence is the order they're going to show on the form. You can't have like a paragraph of data and then put an image and whatever you might want to do with the form. It's similar to a custom screen. So that's what a data form is. I think I have an example one here. You can see one with some fields, department, first name, and date. And the fields, you'll see the different types of fields here are right there. So it's our standard types of fields in the system, and you can use any one of them you like. Like a date, give it a code, give it a label, make sure it's make it required. If you're not going to use it anymore, you can hide it, and things like that. So it makes it easy to make a very simple generic form, but not to be able to customize it in any way. Well, let's look at customizing one. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import in a form just to show you this process, because a lot of times this is how people will use the system to do their forms. You already have an existing form that you've got it in PDF and you want to load it into the system. So that's what the import is for. You can click add and design a form with a blank template and add everything you need on the form. But like I said, most people have at least one form that they're currently using somewhere, and so that's where the import is for. So when I do import here, I'll have to just go out and find that, and I have what I call my confidentiality agreement. Now, when we do that, what happens is it will go down to the bottom of the list here, and you'll see the file name. Mine was confidentiality agreement.pdf, and then we add this numeric thing on here. I really should ask our developers what that is. I'm assuming some type of timestamp. But now that I'm in here, I can edit it and, for an example, remove what I don't need, like that. All right, so that's the name of the form. The type here, you'll see, is a user code table. That's why the blue gear is here, which means I can add a new code if I need to. So you may want to just say this is, let me just see if we have something here, policy acknowledgement, maybe as an example. So very simple to be able to do that. Maybe you want to have something in here for like legal forms or something. So I could click this little gear and add a new code here. I'll just call it legal. All right, the other settings that I might need for a document type. Now I'll talk about these in a little bit. This is where you can set up the different codes there, and I'll talk about the folders too. In there, the document location would be the folders. And is this going to be a candidate document? Is it a resume? Do we use it in the LMS, or is it a cover letter? So you have some different attributes that you can put on there. Of course, you want the code to be active if you want to use it, and you could set it as your default. I'm not going to do that, but you could. All right, so now that I have that here, I can go out and choose legal forms. All right, here you'll notice the workflow. It's not a requirement. I don't need to select a workflow right now. However, when I assign the form to somebody, that's where the workflow is required. But you may want to say that your default workflow is a certain one that you've created. All right, and then your description, of course, you can have it in various languages here. I'm just going to do the English one. But if I wanted to put it in a different language, I could do that right there. Right. Of course, I want it to be active to be able to use it. If I'm not ready to use it, I can make it inactive and maybe still edit it and stuff like that. Do I want to share this with the employee after they complete the form? So after it's approved, it would show up in the documents. And do I want to not lock the form after approval? So by default, the form is locked, which means you can't edit it after it's approved. But perhaps there is a form that you would like people to edit. You can check that box and they'd be able to edit it after it's approved. This is the size of the form. So We got 3 different options here. I'm going to choose letter because I know this is a letter format. And then this is the group or groups of employees who could initiate this form. So you might say this could be done by managers or by operations or whatever groups you want to put in there. I'll get to that. If I am going to put it in self-service, I'll want to put that there. All right, so here's what I imported. So I just found this kind of generic confidentiality agreement out on Google. And so you can see this here. All right, and there's a couple things down here where I'd want to put some values or pull some values from the system. So I've got these fields down here. Now, sometimes you have a PDF that has already fields on it that people would normally be typing into. So if you do have one of those PDFs with fillable fields, we would recognize those, and they would already be a little field on here to indicate that this was a text field. So it's possible you might see that when you go to import. All right, now one of the things I always forget to do, but I like to show people, is that the PDF here is basically an image in the background here, and you might accidentally drag it around. So you're trying to click somewhere and you just misclick or something like that, or whatever, your finger hits the button and you drag it around. You'll see how I can like drag it around, and now it's not centered on the page anymore. So what I like to do, and I recommend you do this, is lock it. So this locks the image in place. It means I can't drag it around if I accidentally click somewhere. All right, so that's one of the first things I do if I'm ever importing in one in there. I think it's an important thing to do. But maybe you don't have the full form. Maybe you only have a little piece of it, and maybe you do want to drag it around. Just that's what this locked means. It means you can't move it, you can't resize it, or anything like that. All right, over here on the right side are various types of fields that you can add to this here. You'll also see a couple of buttons up here at the top. So this one allows you to export the form into an XML format. And it's really useful if you're ever in your sandbox setting up a form and you want to, copy that over to your live. You may go through, add all the fields and test it out and everything in your sandbox and say, yeah, this form's great. We're ready to use it. You can export it out as an XML, and then that import button, you can import it back in to the live system. This button will allow me to add a second page. I only have one, as you can see here at the bottom. But if I needed a second page for some reason, I can add a blank second page. All right, and then the minus would allow me to remove a page. So like that. All right, so those are here. Here is adding different types of fields, and we'll go over these here. So the first one is a text field. So a great example of a text field could be the name. All right, so I'm going to click on this and just drag it over and drop it right here. And, I kind of eyeballed it and this off a little bit, so I can click and drag it around, or I could use these right here to get very precise location where this is X and Y coordinates. So maybe I want to say 230 X, which moved it over slightly to the left. And then I want to move it down a little bit. Let's just say it's 1116, maybe 1150 would kind of, whoops, about that. 1150 would kind of move it down a little bit. Enough. Shoot, let me delete this and save. I don't know why this popped back up, probably because I hit that button on my keyboard accidentally. Let me go back and hit next. So let's see, will it go where I want it to go now? It's covering my screen. Anyway, so let me just 230. I'll make it 270 so you can see it. And then I'll keep this position here. Now, obviously, I can click elsewhere to remove this. But now that I have this field, first thing I have to do if I want to keep a field on here is put a code. All right. The only time you don't need to do that is if you're adding a line, a box, or a signature. So those you don't need to do a code on, because what you're doing here is you are creating a database table in the back end, and this is one of the fields in the database table. So I might call this employee name as an example. All right, so you can do whatever you like in the code, but you can't use the same code twice. So I couldn't have a second field here called employee name. Right. Once I have it in the right location, I can lock it. You'll notice here it disabled these different fields here. I can't move it. I can change the size though. So the employee name, 25 characters. might be enough for most people, but sometimes people have long names. So maybe I want to make it 100 characters. I could do that. And of course, I could change the font size. 14 is the default. Maybe I want to make it 16 or 10. I can change that right there. Right. I can make this a required field, which means whoever's filling this out has to fill in the information. Candidate sensitive would mean if I'm using this form in recruiting for candidates/applicants, is this information confidential to the candidate and maybe the recruiter, but the hiring manager can't see it? Perhaps you're asking for their birth date. You don't want the manager to know about that yet, so you hide it. So that's what candidate sensitive is there. As I go down, I can have a token on here. This will allow you to pull data from the system if I want to. So you can do like at first name and pull the first name as an example. You could do at last name, and there's a bunch of different tokens that if you went over to help here, we talk about some. I don't know if it's right here on this one, but we do have a list of the tokens. Here we go. So you can see some of the tokens that are available here: first name, last name, etc. Okay, so you can kind of see how that would work. So if I wanted to do at first name, it would do that. Now, the other thing I can do in here is I can use a hashtag to do a formula. Very useful when you do numeric fields, but it also works on text fields to combine fields together. For example, I could do first name plus last name, and that'll put their full name. So it'd say like John Smith. All right, so that would work there. I can do this like with address and stuff like that. So that's a way of doing it. If you're doing other fields, actually, I think it's first name I would have to put there, excuse me. But that will allow me to put that field there rather than having two separate fields. But let me show you what it looks like with this, because I want to be able to edit the field. So I'm going to do first name, and that'll put John in there or whatever the person's name is. And then I could tell it, what do I want to do with the value here if they overwrite it? Or maybe I tell it to use a token, but they don't have that already. So maybe I use like middle name and they don't have one in the system. It would put blank because there isn't one, but then I can say save that value into different fields here. So you'll see different fields. I can say save it in the first name. So if they overwrite it, and maybe it says John, but they wanted to say Jonathan or something like that, it would save it there once this form was approved. All right, and these fields that are available are going to be different depending on the type of field you select. Like a date field, of course, you're not going to have name and address and stuff like that because those aren't dates. But you'll see date fields, and so number fields you won't see some because some of these aren't number fields, etc. So that's what the target allows you to do there. If you do want to put a label on here, you can. I could say first name as an example, and if I would like to make it visible depending on another field, this is the very first field I've added, so I can't do that. But I could say make it visible depending on another field. All right, and then finally, validation. What this allows you to do is if it needs to be in a certain format, like say like a social security number or a phone number, needs to be in a format, you can use this validation to set that formatting. And again, in the help, it explains that. Finally is the editable by. And you'll see in here, there's various people that I could say can edit this field. So the submitter would typically be like the employee, sometimes a manager, but they're going to be the person filling out the form. So are they able to edit this? So this allows you to say like, okay, well, the employee, they fill out part of it. So they're the submitter. And then maybe there's a second part that the manager, who's the approver, fills out. So you could say submitter on these fields, and then maybe the approver on other fields. So you could do that and kind of mix and match those on there. All right, so that's what that is all here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some other ones on here. I don't have any number fields, but that's what this is. It allows me to put a number. I have signature and date, but maybe I needed their favorite number. I don't know. I could put a number field on here. And you'll notice here when I go to target fields, they're just numeric fields, right? Like taxes and stuff like that. Okay, going down, this is if I wanted to put an image, maybe like a logo or something else on there, and drag that in, and then I need to select the file that's going to go in that spot. To remove a field, all I'm doing is I'm hitting delete on my keyboard. So that's how I got rid of it. The text block here allows you to have a block of text. This is very useful if you have a blank form you're creating, because then you could put in a paragraph of information. So, whatever I'm going to put there, and I can format it and stuff like that. And now that's there. Now, this is not an editable field by the user who's filling out the form, because it's just like an information or paragraph. So that's how that could be used right there. Right, a date field. So here I'll put the date. And again, I have options for the size and locking it and making it required. So I can do that there. I'm going to say signature date. Okay, again, I could save it in a particular place if I wanted to and set other things, but pretty straightforward. I don't need to save this date anywhere. It's going to be saved on this on here. Here's a checkbox. So if I needed them to say like, I agree, and they check a box, that's what that could be used for there. Again, you have those different options right there. Radio buttons. Now, this is very useful because when you do a radio button, sometimes they have a choice of 3 things and they get to check one of the 3. That's what a radio button would be for. You might have a series of radio buttons like this, and they, can check one of the 3. You need to group them up here. So you give it a name. So as an example, for the US on the W-4, on the I-9, they could choose like, are they a citizen? Are they, on a visa and stuff like that? But they only choose one of them. So you use a radio button and you would call it, citizen type or something like that, or residence type. And then use the same name in all 3 of them and they become linked together. So it is a requirement to do this. You'll see how it's a required field, but this just means that all 3 of these are linked. And if I check one, I cannot check the others, or if I check one, it will clear the other ones out. All right. And then what happens is they would all get saved under the same code here. So I don't need to come up with like separate codes for those. That's what radio buttons are for. Here you can see I can have a memo field. This is one the person can type in, but it's like a big text box. So maybe they need to put notes or something. You can do that with a memo field. With this one here, you'll see like the height might be very important. You may want to say how many total lines they can do. They can only do 3 lines of text or something like that. All right, this right here is a drop down. Now the drop down, you do need to find the table that you're going to use the values from. So perhaps you're going to do like what country or something like that. You can do that here. Now, if you're going to do a custom drop down, you'd have to set that up first before you can add it to your form. Okay, this one here is the signature. All right, so you'll see that. Now, this is kind of the default size. We make it 200 by 200. Obviously, that wouldn't work in my situation, be overlapping the date. So I can just click and drag it a different size like that. You'll see I don't have to put a name here because we're not saving the value in the database that we create. So it's right there. I could say it's required and I want to lock the position, of course. And I can do that. Now, who's going to sign it? The submitter. I might have a second signature for like, HR. They might be like the countersign, but I could say maybe the approver or a verifier is the counter signature. All right, here, if I want to collect an email address, that's what that little envelope is. This is if I need them to attach something. It adds a little browse button for them to attach a document. And then of course they can, it saves it with that. And then this is where I can draw various objects here. So I could draw a line if I wanted to do that, like that. I could do a square. Oops. This is a circle. And then this one is a subform. So this is an important one to know that sometimes when we clear off these lines and stuff, sometimes you might need to add one form, to another. I accidentally deleted the background. You might need to add another form to this. So what you would do is you would select the other form that you're adding. So this form has to exist. So let's say you have an application and you need to have their employment experience, and they can add multiple records. That's where a form like that would happen. You can make a small form that asks for like job title and employer and dates of hire and stuff. And then you can embed that and have it repeat. All right, so that's what this very last one is. I'm sorry, it's kind of underneath it at the very bottom right here. All right, let's only deleted my form there, but here I can see what it looks like. I can preview it so I get an idea of how it all laid out. And then if I want to save it, I can do this. I don't think I can undo my delete there, so I'd have to redo it, but I can save it and I can save and close. So save kind of allows you to save along the way. Now, one important thing is when you save, anything that has a required field, you must fill in. So you have to do that. It'll not let you save until you do that. All right, let me choose a form here, and I'm going to show you how you can manually assign a form to an employee, or you can set who's allowed to initiate the form in self-service. All right, so I'm going to manually assign this form called handbook acknowledgement. And when I do that, this is where the workflow is required. So now I get a choice of who's going to actually do it. Either it's going to be to a group of employees or one or more employee that I select right here from the menu. So you'll see here, I've got 123 employees to pick from, and I can pick those guys. Now, the important thing here is that if my person that I'm currently logged in as is Ted is not in those groups, I won't be able to see him. So we do look at these groups when we go to assign. All right, so when I do this, let me just go in form here. I'll assign it to the very first person, Charlene. I could assign it to more. As you can see, I can search and so forth. If I want somebody else to fill it out, maybe this is like a disciplinary form. It's for Charlene, but somebody else is going to do it. I can do that right there. And then here I'm going to do handbook acknowledgement. Okay. And the due date, if I want to set one, 10/31 as an example, share it with the employee when they're done, and then assign. So what would happen is Charlene would get a notification telling her that she needs to fill out this form. All right, so that's how that works right there. I did want to talk about, forget what it was now. The form types and the document locations. So those are under the code tables. We already added a document type. So, but I want to cover that real quick. This is where I added the gear, and I added that legal as an example. Here are those codes. So if you want to see the existing ones in your system, we do pre-populate a list of, I don't know, about a dozen of these. And you can change them and add your own or make them inactive and stuff like that. But that's what these are here. Now, if you like to put them in certain folders, that's what the document location type is for. So you'll see I have various folders that I've created or whatever. Like I have this one called Steve's Docs and PR and so forth. If you use these codes here, you can actually go back to the previous dropdown and say, this type of file is going to go into this folder. So as an example, I have this one here called HR forms. I can now go to document types, and perhaps I want to say this employee information goes to HR forms. So a good example right there goes to HR forms, or this legal forms goes to HR forms. In this document location, I put in the code, not the description, the code. And then I can save that. Right. So I've assigned a form, I've created a form, talked about these. Let's actually fill out a form. And I do have one already assigned here. So you can see what a form looks like. So now this is one where I created a form from scratch rather than one that's like a PDF. This is one that is a PDF, because you can see now this is the older I-9 form if you're used to this, but you can see what a form looks like. And these are the fields that the person can be filling out. So you see those right there. And this is like an example where I might want to use radios rather than a checkbox. So that's what that would be used for. So that's what a form looks like here. You can, if you allow people to self-assign forms, they can go here and they can assign forms over here. So they can come in here and say, this handbook acknowledgement as an example, I want to assign myself. I'm going to make it due on 10/31. That assigns it to me, and now I can fill out the form. All right, so here's some examples of forms where I had it fill in the person's name. I need to put in the date and then sign the form. An employee can save their signature. I'll show you that in a second. So this is a saved signature, or they could type it in and we sign it for them there. We do keep track of the signature as far as like the, an e-signature, where they were, the browser or the mobile app, etc. So there is an audit trail for this stuff if you need to have that there. And then I'll go ahead and submit this form. Now this would follow whatever the workflow is for this form set in the defaults. Maybe I tell it to go to Chris or something like that. How do you set up your signature? Let me just do that last thing here under security. Here is signature. So I can sign here whatever his signature is and save this, or maybe I want to type it. And of course, if I want to see what was already saved, I can hit the little mountain icon there to see that. But once I have either the signature I did myself or I typed, I can save. And now I can use this signature every time on forms and other workflows where their signature is on there. All right, so that's forms in a kind of a medium level. I'm not gonna say high level because I went pretty medium there. Let's go ahead and look at our future schedule out here. And here's my PowerPoint. Okay, so in a couple of weeks, Thursday the 24th, we're going to be covering recruiting question sets. And this is right around the release time. And the reason I'm covering it is because we've added a whole bunch of new features in the release. You're going to get a little bit of a sneak peek because the webinar is actually the next day. So we're going to cover it in this learning series, and then you'll be able to use it a couple of days later, the new question set functionality. And then we're going to be moving into the payroll year-end timeframe. So starting on the 7th of November, we're going to cover US year-end, and then we'll go 2 weeks after that, Canadian year-end, and then we'll repeat ourselves in December here to cover the US and Canada again. So if you're an HR only person, or I should say a non-payroll person, we only got one more learning series for the year, and we'll pick it back up again in January. But if you are doing payroll related stuff, or maybe you just want to learn about year end for US and Canada, you're welcome to join in those too. So I hope to see everybody here in 2 weeks. And it looks like there were some questions, but they were answered. So thank you, Patrick and Connor. He was here for a few minutes to answer those. And if you do have additional questions, you'll see here, reach out to us at help@criterionhcm.com. So thank you so much for doing this and joining us today. And we hope to see you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.